It's not every day that we meet leaders who lead with soul and a deep understanding of people, while staying grounded in strategy and business outcomes. On this episode of Full Circle, we are joined by Nicola Varghese, whose career spans over 2 decades in the BFSI space, shaping global people strategies and establishing global capability centers across India and Asia. Nicola brings a rare blend of sharp business acumen and deep emotional intelligence. Known for her curiosity, compassion, and commitment to continuous learning, she's a true people leader in every sense. Nicola, welcome to Full Circle. We are so excited to learn from your journey. I think one of the things that we have often started the conversation with is by looking at how the leaders, the HR leaders that we speak with, think about employee health benefits, and specifically in terms of where the responsibility of the employee's health lies, right? Like one of the thesis concepts that I have always kind of struggled with, or at least thought very close to my heart, was that as in the Indian ecosystem, the employer is the only institution that is behind an employee, right? As a result, for healthcare, it one way or the other, whether it's a cost perspective or otherwise, or purely from the productivity perspective, or because the employer feels responsible, it's usually an employer who takes a little bit more onus on the employee's health rather than just leaving it to themselves and saying, do what you want, right? Would love to hear your thoughts and kind of build up from there. Where do you think the onus kind of lies, and how do you think about it in your engagement in operations?
Sure. And I'm coming from a place of just observing this trend over the past 2 decades at least. And to your point about being an HR professional, leader, whatever it may be, I think very early on, one is exposed to that feeling of responsibility towards an employee. Okay. So I think if you just look at it from that front, right, whether you're in HR or otherwise, and I think you get exposed to this more so in HR very earlier on because you are responsible to both the business and the employee. And there is always not a balancing game, but an integration game that one plays. So if you're talking about owners of health and well-being, yes, in the initial days, I think a lot of organizations wanted to have this. It was looked at more as a carrot, and we literally call it a benefit, right? Like I can do
Yeah.
without a benefit, I can survive. But, cut to the past 5 to 8 years, we've realized that it's no longer a benefit. It is literally a medium or a platform that's required to even perform or exist in a VUCA world, so to say, right? You've got volatility happening, you've got uncertainty in your daily life, you've got ambiguity in your work schedule and goals. There's and complexity of the deliverables that you have to make. So when it comes to, it's a very holistic approach now, and I'm so glad to know that this onus that we talk about has not just remained with either company or employee. I think a lot more, maybe post-pandemic, have realized that it's much more an innate accountability that they have towards themselves first. Okay, so I think people are much more well aware of it in today's world. HR has been finding it easier to be able to not only look at it from a benefit point of view, but to look at it as, hey, this is one of the things that's needed, right? It's a basic requirement. One can question whether what is in the offering from organizations is really effective or not. That is always a room for improvement there. Having said that, to be fair to the organization side of it, and I say this because as HR going back, we are luckily exposed to both sides, right? So from a business point of view, I think firstly committing to saying that I will do this even from a budgetary point of view and ensure that none of that is, second guessed in times of, a bad revenue year or whatever else. I think a lot of businesses have rightly so made the commitment towards health and well-being, right? And be it in the form of what they view as benefits. In India, we're used to having that basic minimum of insurance that the organization gives. Now there's something like copay. Now there's much more broader coverage, even of that model. So it's, I would say, mainly in the line of the whole medical domain. But I think onus-wise, there has been an awakening. And that's a good start. And it is a
Cool.
co-ownership, which I think both sides agree is needed.
Good. Nicola, what I'm hearing you basically say is that there's almost like hygiene now, right? Like, for example, I'd take an extreme step in saying that just like your workplace needs to have like a clean bathroom, basic pantry, and all of those
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
now general health benefits is something that's kind of a hygiene thing, and I get it. In the past 5 6 years, a lot has happened. Like the world that we live in is kind of different from that perspective. Just to make sure that you're functioning normally, so there's some basic stuff that has to be done by organizations as such, right?
yeah. That's absolutely true. Even I mean, I don't think it's like hygiene. I think it is hygiene. We just took a long
Hmm.
time to wrap our heads around it. And I think something like the pandemic kind of was an awakening in a lot of people viewed it that way, right? We lost lives, we had disruptions from a workplace, a mental well-being front, all of that. So I think I don't think anyone can go
Hmm.
back now on their word to say that this is not required or this is, frills. These are benefits. It is the core of what any system has to offer, be it organizations or even the non-structured sector, right? So even the non-structured sector
Hmm.
nowadays is looking into how can they help their employees or team members get onto this bandwagon of having that co-ownership model of health and well-being. Yeah,
Right.
so I agree with
So
you there.
Nicola, one of the things that comes to my mind is that look, I've met promoters of some relatively traditional, as you the word you used, non-organized sector sort of a thing. One of the things I realized is that even over there, when somebody falls sick, has to get admitted in the hospital for whatever reason, has an accident or whatever that is, right?
Mm,
They will typically, besides calling their immediate family and saying, "Hey, this happened," the next person they call from a support and help me out perspective is their boss or the promoter of the organization. So
yeah.
whether you want it or not, it does come back to you in some way or the other, as an employer and as an HR. One of the other things that I've always thought is that, look, just like I don't think anybody becomes a doctor purely from a money perspective, right? They become a doctor because they see that there is value and impact you can make in health. Similarly, people
Yeah.
who join the HR side of things come from an angle of empathy, come from an angle of saying, hey, I like to be with people, I like to work people. I think people is an important part of the business and something that I'm very passionate about, sort of a thing. So I also think that it's probably a little bit intrinsic in that sense. Like if you're coming from with that perspective into the profession, then taking care of people is kind of part of the job, right? I mean, have you tell me a little bit about that, like your own personal journey in this term, right? Like, do you relate to
Oh,
it? Does it make sense?
totally. I keep telling my team this, and I say, it takes a different kind of metal to be in a function like HR. And I've done my engineering, I did my MBA. I could have very easily gone in very different paths. I started off my salary at 5,000 in HR, while my peers at that point, my batchmates, were getting, I guess, close to 50,000. But
Sure,
there's
yeah.
a beauty in this kind of a function where I actually feel it works. Okay. Very earlier on, you're exposed to very challenging situations. Talking about health, there was an instance where someone just, fell on the floor and had a, incident. And everyone kind of, it's that fight or flight response, right? Of the freeze response. Most people freeze under those circumstances. And I'm not saying just because you're in HR, you would have a better way of dealing with it, but I think what it does is it helps flex that muscle of how do you
Yeah.
deal with these situations? How do you deal with ambiguity? What's the rational thing to do in a completely irrational state that you're experiencing, right? So I truly believe we're blessed. Whoever's in this function is blessed to be exposed to those kind of situations where it takes a lot about knowing oneself and correcting, recorrecting. It's an iteration of sort because that possible experience may not have been there for any other like another 5 years. But what you will have is someone calling you in the middle of the night saying, "My mother's hospitalized. Can you help me?"
Yeah.
And you could choose to think of it as my God, why can't they just have their data cards with them? Everything is given to them, right? But then going the extra mile, like you said, being a doctor, it can't be. I mean, these professions, it's the money is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like, this. martyr, but at the end of the day, I think it challenges you every day and every hour, because there's no day that goes by in most HR functions, more so in a function like business partnering, for example, where you're declared as the bridge between the employee and the employer, where you're constantly in this phase of ensuring that there is that sense of optimal performance on both sides, right? And
Yeah.
how do you do that? So, from a health front, just coming back to that, Chaitanya, I think in the HR function, we see different sides of people in stressful situations. I've seen, when receiving maybe a bad feedback, people really buckle under that,
Yeah.
and those situational leadership then has to step in, right? HR is perceived more as that feel good, hear me out kind of a function, but I think we've evolved from there as well.
Yeah.
That was just the first step to it, that being approachable. But I think it's not
Mm.
about being the good person in HR anymore. It is about really trying to say, okay, and in this situation, with the information I have, with the access to the business that I have, with the access to the leadership that I have, how do I, guide and mold this employee in this stressful situation? And stress does impact well-being, right? So if you look at it
Mm.
under the umbrella of health, since we're talking about circle, I mean, from a circle health point of view as well, it's highly important because these HR leaders, managers are our navigation channel through the ecosystem, right? So if I'm having a
Correct.
bad day, let's just say my manager actually screamed at me and that's thrown me off
Mm.
completely. I may want to complain to HR, but I think a lot of the complaints don't go further because they at least have someone to talk to, you
Correct.
know so you're actually creating this system of support that's there, and I don't think today it's limited to HR. It's much broader. There are expectations from leaders, there are expectations. So I think a lot of these roles today, are beyond the money. Sometimes you can
Mm.
get all the money that you want, but to perform that role in its entirety will take a whole lot of knowing yourself and applying it every day, relearning. So it's not easy being in a leadership position, and I don't envy a lot of people who are in it,
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
they have to constantly play this balancing act of how do they manage themselves in order to be better for others.
Yeah. Look, I completely hear you on that, Nicola. And in fact, I think one of the things that I was thinking was that, and you kind of made a good segue to that, right? So it is that's a very typical thing that my mother is hospitalized and I will call the HR to get the TPA card, sort of a thing. A lot of times they'll also be asking you which hospital should I go to? Do you have any jugaad over here? And so on and so forth, right? One of the things that in my very first job, I've always been close to the HR team in any company and any job I've worked in, right? So in the very first job that I did, which was in HSBC, again a bank, a long time ago, the HR head actually told me this, that the job is interesting, but it's extremely draining emotionally, right? I think it is mentally taxing for a lot of HR folks to kind of manage this, because there is so much expectation. A lot of people will come and cry their heart out, tell you about everything that's happening in their life, right? How do you, and Nicola, we've spoken about this earlier, how do you kind of maintain that balance? What I mean, would love to understand this in three parts, right? So maybe first start with yourself in terms of how you kind of handle any of these mental health or emotional situations that come up to you. Would love to understand how you then coach or help other managers and HR leaders to do the same thing, right? So tell me a little bit about that from your perspective.
Sure. And yeah, you're right in saying that it does have a lot of strain on the person absorbing it in the situation. More often than not, if the manager route doesn't work out, it is HR. It's not just about the operational calls that one would get, but I think just also keeping a tab right on the psyche of the employee while we're having engagement survey results, all of that enable us as HR. There's nothing like actually knowing, what is Chaitanya acting out
Hmm.
for today? What has
Yeah.
possibly caused that shift in behavior, right? So it doesn't mean Chaitanya needs to come and meet Nicola as HR because there's something drastic that's happened. So I think what happens is HR gets labeled or used to get labeled in the past as this go-to team for all of your problems and it'll get solved and they're approachable. But Chaitanya, the reason why I'm emphasizing on this is because I think the entire function has definitely evolved much more. From a proactiveness point of view, it was a very reactive mode, and the function took pride in being that person that the likes of Chaitanya could approach and for everything and have a great relationship, not only in the company at the time, but even beyond, right? And that was the feel good person, the good HR, etc. But I think what we've evolved to also is so much more complex, where we are not only waiting for that instance of all hell's broken loose in my life, so please help me as a function. But it's more about keeping a tab of proactively what are some of the behaviors that are there in the organization. How is one dealing with certain situations? Is there a team dynamic that doesn't need to be reach a state of complaint, but what is the team health, right? So keeping that pulse and check is important. So I think it's even beyond the whole thing of crisis management. So the example that you took was more about how do I manage myself when I'm absorbing a crisis from somebody else and trying to either calm the person down, help the person out, ensure that the person's navigating that situation. Our roles become much more than that. So the stress is multifold, right? Where our expectation as HR is to provide the business with an insight of what's the pulse on the floor. How are things actually working out in, let's just say, an M&A situation, right? There are such high tensions on either side. No one may come to you because maybe they feel like it's a very sticky situation, it's too complex. What if, and also the credibility of HR and leadership sometimes gets questioned, sadly, but it
Of
does,
course.
right? It's reality because we're human too. So how do you navigate through all of that and ensure that you are picking up on the cues? So you need a very different kind of way of absorbing, firstly, observing. So I think in HR, the way to manage stress has been a huge learning for myself. I don't claim to do it well. In fact, over the years, I think I've prematurely grayed because of it. But at the end of the day, it's allowing yourself to observe. If you really truly believe in the function, or forget the function, truly believe in making an impact, uh, you then realize, right? And I luckily had this awakening because I used to pursue dance. So I think in the first 10 years of my career, without knowing it, all of these situations that came up at work, as well as during engineering, I think when you've got your boards, etc. I realized it much later, but this was one thing that made me a better person at managing stress, like going somewhere and just really venting it out, releasing it. Movement helps you feel better. We all know that. So for me, at least, it was more ensuring that I had a hobby, and I pursued that as a passion. Okay, and that made me a better professional, even in the work front, where it got to do with multitasking or really just ensuring that you're understanding the psyche of an individual who's talking to you. So I think it's important to have that. But then the second part of the 10 years, I think it was much more looking inward. So understanding that, hey, this is getting too stressful. I'm not able to. So the whole fight and flight come into mode, right? Like, can you really assess situations without being completely anxious? So I actually used to have a lot of high anxiety the past, I think between the 10 to 15 year, because you're really trying to make your mark. You want to climb up the ladder. Obviously you're taking on a lot, and it was about that time I had my baby. So and you don't want to let go of your career. So at least with me, it was a lot about, I want my professional life to flourish, and I want to do this back home. So how am I going to manage myself, right? And that was the revelation to say, I need to manage myself. So what ignites me, what calms me down, what helps me become a better person? And that's where the whole thing of each one learning how and being responsible to themselves about being in a place of offering their best selves to the other person. Okay, it's not come easy for me. I've really struggled with balancing it all out. To give you an example, the last 3 years I took up this, you get these 199 kind of things saying join the 5 a.m. club. It may sound
Hmm.
really trivial, but I struggled with getting up at that time at one point. Okay. And I was actually super good at it earlier in my young adulthood. Like I used to get up very early, go for yoga, do all of that. But with a baby,
Hmm.
like the whole system and
Of course.
schedule changed, right? So to get back to it was such a struggle, but I said, okay, fine, let me just see what it is. Cut to 3 years from now, I mean, the past 3 years, that 5:20 is just the time that I get up. And it's become more of a, it's just something that my body clock's used to now, right? And that
Hmm.
helps me because if I start on my day, I'm able to meditate. So I think one has to figure out their lifestyle, and how do you take that then back to work? And I was honestly, the days that I don't meditate or don't do something physical like yoga or something, I know for a fact that that day I'm not giving it my best. Maybe I could sail through it, right?
Yeah.
Meetings will happen, conversations happen, deliverables will be met. It's not a disaster. But how
Hmm.
did I feel through that day while doing that? And could I have, instead of doing this much, done that much? I can clearly see it nowadays, right? And maybe it's the post 40 syndrome, I don't know, but but it tends to be much more clearer. So yeah, so to your question about how do you manage it, I think each of us manage it differently. I think some of us
Hmm.
have had the awakening to do it much more diligently, and I would hope that all of us have that awakening much earlier in our careers. So yeah, that's where I would come from, Chaitanya.
So, Nicola, I think that's super interesting and deep in that sense, right? By the way, like I've always had this formula that if you're able to do some kind of physical activity for 30-45 minutes in the day and maybe even 5 minutes of meditation, that's the formula for a good day, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
and
wild.
I'm not able to
Yeah.
do this every time, yeah. But
And
so Nicola, would
yeah.
sorry, go on.
No, no, I was just saying, and what you said is simple, right? Everyone knows it.
Hmm.
We've
Hmm.
known it from the time that I guess we start. I mean, we know it maybe because of peers or whatever, right? I mean, irrespective of how we got to know it. Um, the simplicity of it makes it the toughest because your mind tricks yourself to say, okay, I'll do it today, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it in the morning, I'll do it
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
evening, and you feel like, but kind of like the complexity of a marathon gets you much more charged up for some reason because
Hmm.
there is a
Hmm.
reward associated with it. So I think you're right that while we talk about just 30-40 minutes, each one needs to also understand what is it that triggers them to at least do that much, right? And how can they use these hooks of either being part of a marathon or either learning a dance form or learning a new language even to have some kind of a downtime for themselves in terms of well-being. But yeah, physical
True.
activity, there's no way out.
Hmm. Yeah, Nicola, one question. Like you mentioned that you went through. I mean, in the past 3-4 years, you've kind of tried to set things right and kind of come to a good place where you are right
To the
now.
extent that I
Was it?
can.
Yeah, and look, it's a journey for everybody, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, for
we're all
sure.
still figuring out. I don't think there's an end point in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So, Nicola, I was wondering, like, was it just the appreciation and recognition of it that, hey, look, I'm stressed. This is not going well. I need to fix things. So let me do something about it. Or did you have like a journey itself in that? Did you go and see a counselor? Tell me a little bit
Yeah,
more
yeah,
about
for
that personal
sure.
journey, right?
I think, I mean, again, thanks to dance, I think it opened me up to a lot more of knowing the triggers and cues of my body and mind. I lost it somewhere along the way, and I knew that that was lost it in the sense of knowing myself, right? Like, why am I reaching this extreme state of stress
Hmm.
when someone else can manage it well enough? You start comparing yourself with people as well, right? Whether it's your partner, whether it's your ecosystem, whether it's your friends in higher positions, or whatever else, they're dealing with it, and you feel like, okay, everyone's dealing with it. Why is this happening to me? And I think what really played a number on me was post pregnancy, right? And
Hmm.
for whatever said and done, at the end of the day, whether you label it postpartum or not, there tends to be a lot of hormonal changes, lifestyle changes, physical changes around you,
Of
right?
course, of course.
And it's not one that anyone prepares you for. And I know this topic's done to death in today's world, but
And I think it's not done to death
it is.
enough actually, but
But
carry
at
on.
the end of the day, it is happening. All right. So
Correct.
it's not about. So when you say awakening awareness, that was there. I think I
Hmm.
ignored it for a long time. All right, because other things in life took priority. And it is a basic core thing, right? Your maternal instinct, the nurturing instinct. You tend to do a lot of us tend to say, okay, I'll do this for this time, and everything else, you take a back seat. It's always you being the last thing. So I realized that while I went through a role, when my son was fairly young, like 6 months to about 3 years or so, um, everything I also looked at was very like, oh my God, I didn't get it. And I personalized it, and no one was really saying anything negative, but I was personalizing, saying, I know I could have done this. I know I could have done this better. Right. But I was holding myself to a huge
Very
standards
high
that
one. Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
I could not meet because I had this new life to be responsible for. And I completely ignored my body, which I've never been, body and mind, which I've never been in a state of because dancing used to inevitably help me forget staying fit, right? Being aligned in that sense.
Hmm.
So I think with all of this, craziness that happened, I realized that I know the state in which I want to be. I know that I'm far, far off from it. I know that I've ignored it for a long time. Okay. And then knowing me, I went on to take the head of HR role in another organization and the pandemic hit. So imagine
Killed yourself
you
basically.
already know you're kind of like, in all directions and you're stressed. But hey, there's this career focus that you have because you're passionate.
Of
I'm
course,
really passionate
of
about this
course.
field. And I second guessed myself saying, do you want to be in HR, Nicola? After, I had my child and I said, is this the way that I want to go? And there was no question. So I took up that job, pandemic hit. Stress levels were like constant, right? Because every time you're switching between someone either falling sick, you're on video calls, you're at home in an ecosystem where everything is dependent mostly on you. And I have to say, it was a journey for everyone, right? We're in a better state now. But I think from a mental health front, just coming to that, Chaitanya, and I'm sorry it's a long wounded answer,
No, no,
but
this
I
useful.
think it was
Go ahead, please.
important for you to understand the phases
Context,
in
of
which
course.
at least I went through it. And I suppose you can't label it, but I suppose here and there it's the same for most of us. Okay.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know that there is a gap. You'll be
Hmm.
like, okay, I'll address it. So that's ignoring. So there's awareness. There's some kind of, I will get to it kind of a syndrome.
Yeah.
Then there is this, accountability that you suddenly know you have to take, right? And that's what
Hmm.
happened to me during the pandemic as well. I was in that it was it was a lovely role, but it was challenging. Okay, at the end of the day, to be responsible for the lives of everybody in your organization, think out of the
Imagine
box,
that.
think completely different about ways of working, etc. Insurance, like everything. So I did go and I did this more to role model that going to a counselor is not a bad thing. Okay,
Hmm.
because we did offer through another medium, we did offer this to associates because we said it's important that they have somebody to speak to. The few in HR or the few in leadership may be too little for them to come and approach and speak to about their day-to-day problems because a lot of the pandemic was the office entering a home, right?
Hmm.
Not the other way around. So it's literally the office coming into your home space and how you're managing that. So we tied up with this, firm for counseling, and I could see that not many people were taking it up. And whether you call it stigma or whatever, right? So I said, okay, let me just role model this, and I went through my own journey and spoke about it in a few town halls and all of that. So yeah, I mean, you have to be willing to go through the grunt yourself as well. So accountability is one thing, and then it moves to action, right? So for me, in my head, it's a lot about awareness, having a level of absorbing it, internalizing what you're going through that awareness journey, then getting into this whole thing of, okay, I need to take accountability for myself, and then moving to action. And moving to action has multiple, steps after that for sure. But I would say, yeah, this is how, I've been blessed to be able to be aware of it, at least to start with. So
Good.
that's the beginning.
Like I understand. I think all of us have had similar different journeys in that respect. Mine has been very similar in that respect as well. One question and thought I had, Nicola, and you mentioned this earlier in our conversation. Like I think as HRs, and sorry to say it the way I'm going to say it, but as people professionals, your job is people, right? So you tend to specialize, you tend to spend more time in terms of understanding every aspect of just workforce of that individual, what a human mind thinks, like, sort of a thing. We were speaking about this earlier. You said you're not envious of leaders, right? Because usually before I go to my HR BP or HR person, I'll at least give a shot with my manager saying, "Hey, can you handle the problem that I'm going through, which might be
Yeah.
personal, professional, whatever." Similarly,
Yeah.
there might be conversations around re-entrenchment or restructuring, whatever those things are. From How have you seen, like, leaders typically handle the softer aspects of their job? It's not. I'm sure there is. I don't know how many leaders actually spend a significant amount of time thinking about how do they engage with their people and do what they do in terms of any kind of crisis. So tell me about how your experience in terms of dealing with leaders has been, and
Yeah.
is there something that you try to do to kind of coach them, help them in managing their team and the emotions of their team as such? I mean,
Yeah.
there was a lot from your own learning that you could probably share with them and help on that
Of
regard,
course.
right?
And I think, again, I think a lot of this relates to mental well-being, okay,
Hmm.
of oneself and others. If I were to look at it from that perspective, which it is, because there's no real physical, I mean, you may have the one-off sick days and absenteeism in
Yeah,
teams, right,
yeah.
that leaders deal with. But I think what leaders, and I won't even go into a stretch and say leaders, I would say the
Hmm.
managerial layer, because they're the ones
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
holding the weight, right?
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, I say I'm not envious of them, because they have this responsibility towards the leadership. They've got the responsibility towards, from a career standpoint, towards their team members. And they're meant to be HR in their own role. They're meant to be, a coach. They're meant to be an inspirer. They're meant to be, everything on a given day to the team member as well as the leader. So that layer, although it's the broadest kind of first leadership layer, I feel is the most stressed in the organization. Okay. And from an HR front, I think there have been multiple ways in which we've tried to intervene. Firstly, conceptually about what is the gamut of people management. And I know there are, fabulous, what do you say? We've reached a really good state where people have courses and everything else, right? Like very deep kind of learning, experimental way of case study based things of enabling the manager to understand that people management is acha, not just hiring, firing, balance
Yeah.
of your worksheet deliverables, right? It is people management, so it's going to take a much more from you. And are you sure you're ready for this kind of a role? So when I say from an HR front, Chaitanya, I think the readiness is not, I'm a little bit of a purist and an idealist, and that's helped me stay the course. So I'll allow for myself to continue to be. But I think a lot of people need to start making that decision. Am I cut out for this? Do I want to do this when it's not just a hierarchy or a promotion thing? Okay.
Absolutely.
So to
Hmm.
your point, are they equipped? I don't know where, starting from self, I don't know whether they're equipping themselves to be open to saying, this role will require all of this. Am I ready for this stuff? Okay, it starts there. The second part is when you're in the role, what are you doing to manage it? Okay, because from an HR perspective, a good start point has been these courses to enable them. But a course is just a course, right? At the end of the day, how you apply it on your day to day is what matters. You can get
Correct.
something called a fabulous manager certification, but you can really have a very contradictory feedback from your team members in an engagement survey. Okay, so really where's the rubber hitting the road. And I don't envy them because they are pressurized by business deliverables. We see it every
Absolutely.
day, right? So as
Hmm.
HR enabling them, especially where the business partnering function comes into play, I would think, more so than the other aspects of HR. Not that I'm trying to say that, other aspects are not uh, compounding or complementing
Hmm.
this effort. But I think definitely the business partnering aspect has much more, and which is why you've seen that role or function come into the forefront in the last decade or so, much more, right? It's not an HR
Hmm.
generalist role. You're not just firefighting, you're not just kind of doing a feel good, fun activity, Rangoli days. It's not really about that. It is about, hey, how our goals align to the strategic plan. Is the manager able to say that? So coming back to the leaders and the manager layer, I actually think the leadership is in a good place because most senior leaders, etc., have coaches,
Hmm.
okay, either within the organization or somewhere else. Who does the manager have? Okay, so HR tends to be that coach, yes,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think a much more of it is required, and also a decision about, you know, do we have the right people in those roles? Okay, not just a fabulous marketer becomes a manager because of the numbers that he or she or them brings in, right? So
Hmm.
I think it's going to be it has started being a systemic change, which is good to see. The pace is questionable, right? Because especially
Correct.
in a socio-economic driven society like India, the talent is very, very ambitious
Yeah.
and very hierarchy driven in that, right? They want to get to the top fast, they want it quick. We're seeing it with different generations, but irrespective of generation, who didn't want to reach the top, if you see,
Of course.
right?
Hmm.
And if you have to make some shortcuts here and there, so be it. So, unfortunately, that's left us with is a layer of possible managers who um, are not enabled enough,
Hmm.
to play that role and the complexity that that role brings. So, yeah,
Got it.
so the dependency on
No,
HR becomes more.
yeah, yeah. I think and I think my biggest takeaway in this was that look, somewhere when you're moving from an IC to a manager role, you need to be clear about, are you equipped, are you ready to do what it takes to be that, more than just the taskmaster sort of a thing, right?
For
I
sure.
think that is something that gets lost a lot of times. Makes perfect sense. I think there are tools available for you to be coached for it, but you have to be willing to say that I'm going to invest time in trying to become a better people person, or whatever is the word to use over there.
Yeah,
Nicola.
and I think it's a lot of letting go, right? You
Yeah.
reach that position with this drive that you've had in terms of doing well in your career, and
Correct.
however you do it, you get there. And coming back to a wellness front, maybe you're happy for that moment that
Hmm.
you've got that title, right?
Hmm.
But how do you
Hmm.
sustain that feeling of accomplishment for yourself and also realize that a lot of the accomplishment as you climb the ladder is about getting other people to be accomplished? I think that
Yeah.
is delinked a lot today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The individualism that unfortunately exists when one becomes a manager and a leader. And not to, use a broad brush, but this is, I mean, from at least 20 years of experience of what I've said, most of them uh, come across or maybe grapple with, this whole thing of letting go. How do you put the spotlight on your team? How do you really uh, be accept and be comfortable with the fact that, hey, if they really shine, it's a reflection of you
Yeah.
anyways. You're going to be, part of that spotlight. When the candle shines, you're part of the
Hmm.
lit room, isn't it?
Of course. Of
So
course.
I think that letting go, now coming from not managerial but maybe leadership perspective of
Hmm.
wellness, that's going to be key,
Yeah.
to be okay with not wanting to, always get the reward. But how do you then start being the channel of rewarding, of recognizing? And I'm not saying as gift coupons and all that, but I'm talking
Hmm.
about, heartfelt
Yeah.
interventions with your people. So I think that is far and few from what I've seen.
No, I think there are so many. It's fairly nuanced. Many aspects as far as being a leader, or even a manager is concerned. Nicola, I mean, we spoke about this earlier, and I know that you have a fairly scientific approach to this. We spoke about neuroscience, how it plays a role, how you actually structure your entire thoughts around this. I know you spoke a little bit about this earlier in this conversation itself, but maybe would love to kind of go one step deeper into that. What got you into it? Explain a little bit about when you say neuroscience, what exactly do you mean, sort of a thing?
Sure. So maybe I'll just give you a story in the interest of time
Yeah,
as well, as to what
sure,
got me into it. I think, again, this whole journey of aligning and maybe getting back to the body that I recall and remember. And I don't say this from a fitness front, it's more from a feeling front, right? Am I aligned
sure.
with my posture better? Am I able to, sustain? I couldn't sustain the long hours of seating. So I think it was like peeling the onion, Chaitanya. So I think from getting from there to say then, body alignment to mind alignment. So meditation helped me there to then soul alignment, right? So I think in that mix somewhere I understood that it's a little bit, I mean, I was curious to say it's a little bit weird how all of this is interconnected. And I just started reading up on neuroscience, and in the past 6 months or so, I've done a few courses on that from a
Got
few
it.
universities. And in fact, just day before yesterday, I got my certification as a neuroscience coach. Okay. But
Wow,
applying
congratulations.
it, I mean, I don't know the medical terms and all at the back of my hand, but it's been such a curious journey to your question. What is neuroscience? It's a study of us, right? It's a study of our nervous system. How does our brain, how does our body function? What is that communication? So for me, I viewed it like, every time I needed to do 10 more sets of push-ups, my brain had to come into play and say, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, don't give up, right? So there's this dance that the brain and the body is playing constantly, right? Even in your sleep, there is your body is resting and your brain's actually using that rest time to reiterate what you've learned that day, which is why sleep is so important. So neuroscience is nothing but ensuring that you can perform I mean, I would say my awareness towards that subject has really enlightened me as to how to maintain an optimal kind of functioning, right? And yes, days throw you off, days don't. But I believe that the resilience muscle of coming back to saying, let me take my day back, irrespective of what's happened, and understanding ways in which I can do it and what I benefit from is what has been the journey. In simplistic terms, neuroscience is nothing but getting to know ourselves through the nervous system, right? And how does our nervous system react? So yeah, so
Understood.
that's just been something of interest, and very interestingly, this is completely applied to leadership as well. And I hope to make a bit more of what do you say progress there, because as an HR professional, it's really interesting to see how stress can really throw you off as an employee, as a leader, and how are some things in the workplace. How do you apply it to performance management? How do you apply it to diversity? So there are very interesting studies on it. There are amazing people in the field of neuroscience who I think have written immense amount of material on it. So I've been having a great time just getting absorbed in learning on some of that.
Got it. So this is primarily basically about how does the mind control the body essentially, right? Like how do you
And vice
basically, I
versa.
mean, that is the core of that.
Yeah, yeah, and vice versa. Because when you're running and
Hmm.
you get into the state of, the runner's high, it's your
Huh.
body that started the running, right? Your mind didn't say, okay, your mind's not doing much when you're physically very active in that sense. And you may relate to this if you're, a runner or you're
Yeah.
doing intense sports. You reach the stage of high, like in a sense, being dazed, right? You're just on this high.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's your
Right.
dopamine that's kicked in, right? That's your serotonin that's kicked in. What are those? Those are neurotransmitters. And in order to get to that state, and if you see a lot of CEOs are marathon runners, and a lot of
Okay.
people do this now. It's become a thing because it's so addictive. Why is it addictive? Because you're getting introduced to dopamine, which is, another word for a
And there's
feel-good
good
hormone.
dopamine, right? There's not bad dopamine.
Exactly,
There's like
right?
good
And
dopamine.
you're getting
Yeah.
fit in the process. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
what's interesting is really around, just recognizing these things, joining the dots for yourself. It's a great journey of awareness of how your how your body leads to a better functioning of your mind, and sometimes how your mind ends up, influencing your body much more, whether it's positive or negative. That's the choice we have as humans, right? So, yep,
Got it. And I'm sure over the next year, 2 years, you'll actually implement a lot of this at work. You will use these
I
tools
hope
to
so.
kind of
I
help
believe
help
so. Yeah.
managers and leaders, right?
Yeah, right now
Got
there's
it.
a lot of theory around it, but I
Hmm.
really do hope that we can. And honestly, it's already implemented, right? So if I were
Hmm.
to take a quick example,
Sure.
in performance management, the whole part about, uh, rewarding, right,
Hmm.
is related to serotonin, which is your kind of, not serotonin, sorry. When you talk about a reward for a certain
Hmm.
job well done, which is primarily what our performance management system ensures. You're
Hmm.
talking about someone saying, okay, I've set a goal. How clear is the goal? How do I get there? And when I get there, I will get that reward, right? So, assuming that happens, your endorphins, all of those, that's kicking in. But in order to
Yeah.
go through that goal setting, we've all heard this, your goals need to be SMART. Okay,
Hmm.
that whole acronym has come from neuroscience. It needs to be
Hmm.
specific, and sometimes just thinking about a goal, right? So if you say, Chaitanya, if I tell you, Chaitanya, I want to run an ultra marathon 4 years from now, just thinking of the goal
Hmm.
excites me. So it is
Correct.
already stimulating me towards it, right? Towards that thing. So, which is why we say employees need to
Definitely.
understand their goals. They need to be
Hmm.
smart, uh, using the acronym of simple, measurable, specific, and so on. So, actually, it's already applied in today's world. It's just that we don't see it from that lens. And
That
we
lens, yeah.
see it as, I've heard it in 10,000 coaching things about objective setting,
Yeah.
and yeah, 20 years later, even I'm looking at it with a different light, right? So having, had a lot around goal setting for organizations. So yeah, so that's one example, Chaitanya, of how some of these things are there, but I think
Hmm.
it's when you look at it in a different light, you appreciate it more, you relate to it more. So yeah,
Realistically. Yeah.
I hope that
So,
helps.
Nicola, this is fantastic, right? I think this has been one of the most involved and personal conversations that I've had in a very long time. Thank you so much for your
I'm
time.
glad.